So what we're going to talk about in this section is about how you graph linear functions. And throughout this book, we're going to talk about how you graph certain things. But the first thing that we need to talk about after talking about graphing ordered pairs is how you graph a linear function. And the main thing that you need to know about how you graph a linear function is that you need at least 2 points to graph a line. Okay, you need at least 2 of them. And anything else after that will be okay. So what we're going to talk about is how you graph 2 points from this and how you connect them and make a straight line. So you need at least 2 points. So when you look at something like this, we have this function and we know it's going to be a linear function. So what we need to do is we need to find 2 points, and we can start at any point that we choose. So I'm just going to start at any point. I'm just going to say that x is going to be 0. Okay, it doesn't matter what point we choose. Doesn't matter. I'm going to let x equal 0. So what we need to do is we need to find out what the y value is that corresponds to it. So I need to find out what that is equal to, what f at 0 is, or the y value when x is 0. So I need to plug in 0 for x and figure out what that's going to be for y. So I plug in that x value and I evaluate it and I get 0 plus 3. Or 3. So I get a value of 0 comma 3. So that's my first point. So I'm going to plug that point in right there. And it's 0 comma 3. So there's my first point. So now I need to pick out another point. And it doesn't matter what point I pick, but if you notice I have a fraction of a half. So I'm not going to get whole numbers every point I pick. So I want to pick something that can multiply easily into a half. So I'm going to pick something that can be multiplied easily by a half. So I'm going to pick a multiple of a half. So I'm going to pick let x equal, let's say, 2. And I picked that because I can multiply a half by that very easily. So I need to figure out what that is for y. So I'm going to plug in 2 for x. So if I plug that in, I'm going to get negative 1/2 times 2 plus 3. And I'm going to get negative 1/2 times 2. Well, negative 1/2 times 2 is equivalent to negative 1 plus 3, which is equal to a positive 2. So my answer for this point is 2 comma 2. So I have to go on this line and go over 2, up 2, and there's my next point, 2 comma 2. So both of these points are on the line. So what I need to do is make a line that goes through them. So I'm going to make a line that goes through both of them. And using a ruler or a straight edge or anything that you can that's fairly close, you're going to draw a line that goes through them, and this is your line that goes through them. And this is the line right here. So it doesn't matter which points you have to pick, but as long as you pick 2 of them. So I'm looking at another one. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to start just with the same, and you're going to probably notice a pattern very quickly with these, but I'm going to deal with 0 right away just because it's very easy to deal with. Okay, so if I plug 0 in, I get 3/5 times 0 minus 4. And that's going to reduce to 0 minus 4 or a negative 4. So my first point is 0 comma negative 4. So I'm going to go down to 0 comma negative 4. And there's my first point. So now I need to pick another point. Because I have a fraction of 3/5, I want something that's divisible by 5. So I'm going to pick another point that's divisible by 5, why not just pick 5? Doesn't matter which one you pick. You can even pick something that's not 5. You could even pick 1. The only problem is you're going to get a fraction. So if I plug in 5, I get 3/5 times 5 minus 4. 3/5 times 5 is going to be 3 minus 4. It's going to be -1. So my second point is 5, -1. So I'm going to go out to 5 and to -1. There's my second point. So I'm going to make a line connecting these 2 points. And there is my line or my graph of this linear function. And it's important to know that all these points that are on this line are solutions for this equation. So every point that's on this line is a point that's going to work for this equation. Now we have something that's a little bit different. It doesn't have this number at the end. So we have just this linear function without a number at the end. So I'm still going to just pick a 0 and see what happens. So I'm going to plug in 0 and see what happens. 2/3 times 0. Well, what I'm left with is 0. So my first point is 0, 0. So the first point is actually the origin. So this line goes through the origin. Now I need to pick a number that's divisible by 3 because the denominator is 3. So I'm going to let my second point be 3. So at 3, I'm going to plug that in. I get 2/3 times 3. And I get an answer of 2. So my second point is 3, 2. So I go right 3 and up 2. So my second point is 3, 2. I have 2 points here. I'm going to draw a line going through the 2 points. There is my graph of this function. And again, all these points that are on this line are points that are solutions to this graph. Now, what we're going to talk about next is how you graph something in different forms. And when you look at something like this, it says write it in this form. And we haven't talked about this form yet, but you've seen this from multiple classes up to this point. And when we talk about slope later on in this chapter, you're going to see how we go about doing this. Okay? So what we need to do is we need to take a look at this equation and we need to solve it for y. So we want our goal for this to be y equals something. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to first subtract 3x from both sides. So that's no longer on this side. And on this side I'm left with 2y, and on this side I can't combine these two things. So what I'm left with is negative 3x plus 6. Now I haven't solved this for y yet. So in order to solve this completely for y, I have to divide by 2. And if you're going to divide one thing by 2, you have to divide everything by 2. It's a rule of equality. You divide one thing, you have to divide everything. So what I'm left with is, well, this becomes a fraction. Negative 3 halves x plus 6 divided by 2, that becomes a 3. Now, when you graph this, you have to pick 2 points again. So I'm going to let x equal 0, and I'm going to do the exact same thing, except it's not going to be a function. So I'm going to plug this in here, and if you plug 0 in, this whole thing becomes 0, and you get y equals 3. So my first point is 0, 3. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing, but I want to pick something that's divisible by 2 because the denominator is 2. So why not pick 2? So I'm going to plug that in again for x. 3 halves times 2 plus 3 will give me what y is equal to. 3 halves times a negative 3 halves times 2 is a negative 3 plus 3 is going to give me y, and y is going to be 0. So my second point is 2 comma 0. So there's my second point. I have 2 points on my graph. I'm going to take and connect these 2 points, and there is my graph right there. Now you're going to find something completely different when we start talking about a different equation here in the next section. But for right now, what we want to do is we want to find 2 points. Okay? Now, what I'm going to talk about in the next section is how you graph something that looks like this. What are specifically how you graph things that don't necessarily have an x or a y to evaluate for, and how you go about doing that.